Okay.
Live.
We are broadcasting live here and for the forum, Tuesday, the 17th of February, and we're here with Father Alan Boyd and Father Jeffrey Frate, correct?
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Really excited.
Prescott, Arizona.
Oh yeah, from Prescott, Arizona. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe Father Alan, you want to introduce Father Frate so we can, or do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. So Father Jeff is a classmate of mine and one of my favorite classmates. I had always considered Father Jeff to be one of the finer theologians that I've ever met. Most especially because he is incredibly pastoral in his approach. He can be very academic when he needs to be, but everything always keeps coming back around to a very pastoral approach to everything, and I really, really appreciate that. I look forward always to reading whatever he's written, and I look forward to talking with him about that afterwards. And so we were talking ahead of time about what might be something, contemporary, a good topic to speak of. And Father Jeff brought up this particular situation about this young man who had committed suicide. I believe it was in January. And so, Father Jeff, I'll let you introduce that.
Okay. I can't see you now. It's horrible.
Oh, sorry. It's okay. Promise. So yes, tell us more about this. What the situation happened in Ohio.
So, I wrote this little piece. I was thinking about this boy. I'd read articles about him, and really the piece. I mean, it grew as a response to what had happened with him. So he was a young man who felt that he did, from an early age, developed a strong desire that he wanted to become a woman, and it was really hard for him. He was living in a kind of an evangelical Christian home, so they were pretty serious, conservative Protestant home, and his parents were really unhappy with that, with him wanting to do that, and they sent him to therapy. They did different things like that to try and get him to change, and he couldn't change. And there's a lot of dynamics that come into play in these situations where you have friends at school that were encouraging him in his desire to have, to go in the direction of having sex reassignment surgery and things like that, and which at his age it would begin with like hormone therapy, and then it would move on from there as he was older. And so he received that kind of encouragement at school and from teachers, I'm sure, maybe counselors, but then he goes home and his parents say, no, this isn't the way. We're trying this. And so you can see how there's all of these social factors that are kind of like pulling this kid apart. And eventually he became very depressed and was kind of in despair, and one night took his own life, and he had a letter that kind of explained his situation and why he was taking his life, that was scheduled to be posted, and it was the type of thing where if he was still alive, he would block it from being posted, I think on his Tumblr account, if I'm remembering correctly. But since he wasn't alive, it was posted, and it immediately kind of went viral. It spread pretty quickly on the web. And one of the things, I guess, that disturbed me so much when I was reading it when I read his thoughts about why he felt that he had to take his own life, and because he felt like there was no hope for him, that if he couldn't bring about this desire, and if he couldn't do it now, because I guess apparently it becomes much more difficult to begin the process of a sex change as you get older, and so he wanted to do it when he was young, but his parents weren't supportive of that, and so they weren't willing to help him. And so he describes in the letter that he fell into despair because he wouldn't be able to accomplish this goal of becoming a woman, and or at least begin the process right then. And what really, I guess, astonished me in reading people's responses to it was how it seemed to me so sad that this poor kid was literally torn apart by this desire. Now, and of course, there were other factors that were involved. Like I said, with his parents, I don't know really what the situation was like at home, although they do seem to have been loving parents, but they just wanted him to change. But then also there's the influence from school. There's all these factors that come into play. But one of the things that really shocked me when I was reading, especially people's responses online to his reflection about why he was going to kill himself, is that nobody considered at all that this this desire to it was the desire itself, even in his own words, that led him to despair. The fact that he couldn't fulfill this one desire, and it was as if I can't do this, I'm better off dead. And it just made me think so much of ancient idols. I started thinking about how, and that was when I wrote this piece, how they demand everything. And I was thinking about even young girls that go through bulimia and torture themselves to attain to a particular image, to look a certain way, to have a certain figure, but it's never enough. I mean, they're totally emaciated, they're practically a skeleton, and they still think in their mind that they're not thin enough. And so I started thinking about, in the past, these idols that demand sacrifice, but then give nothing in return. There's no love there. There's just a demand that you give everything. You give your blood. You give your life. And in the end, you find that you're still empty. And what a contrast that is to a God, that we talk about within Orthodoxy, God being love. And that, yes, being a Christian, the Lord asks for everything, but He's already given His own life. And so He's not asking for anything more than what He's given. As a matter of fact, He's asking for less than what He's given for us. And so just the contrast to those two things really shocked me, and I was really disturbed and just really sad for this poor kid and for his family and for his friends. And you read even comments, people responding as though almost as though he had done something noble in taking his own life, and without considering the fact of what, tragically, what suicide does to a community or to your friends or to your family, how it's a completely tragically self-absorbed act. And so I started thinking about that, and that was when I wrote this reflection about his situation. And maybe I'll just should I read it out loud?
Oh, that would be great. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's, O love of self, O universal hater, I would not spit on your grave, but rather offer prayers and grieve deeply that a child should be so bound by his wishes that they enslave him like a hideous idol of old, biting and sucking its own life from his neck. How is it that the devotee is willingly slain, put up to it by the beast, while it lounges fat, lithic, and unimpressed? And as he sinks into Hades, the world praises it for having taken him. What is the matter with people? It has its desire. The boy is dead. Anyone that wishes him living, how can he praise the beast that demanded the child's blood? I saw a cat play with a bird, swatting, playfully clawing and tearing, bringing the fear of death to a feverish pitch before it bit and disinterestedly broke and munched him. I saw the same thing today, but not one person so much as scolded the cat. Rather, they praised him. Sometimes a beast is swift to devour, but at other times it demands a lengthy gauntlet of nipping and tucking, vomiting, medicating, bending, twisting until the back is broken, until the throat is raw, until the well is dry and every penny spent, and one is left in bleak emptiness, because all that wasn't enough. I saw the same thing today, but not one person so much as scolded the beast. Rather, they praised him and fled even more fervently to his altar. At the full end of self-love, there is always suicide, and this not only for oneself, but the annihilation of one's world. There is no suicide that is not a suicide bomber. All that for an idol. All that blood was given just to kill you. Not a thing changed, because there's no way to make an idol live. I don't even know how to offer prayers for you because I suppose you wouldn't want them, and it breaks my heart. This is a quote from St. Maximus the Confessor. It is truly terrible to cause voluntarily the death of the life which we have received from God by the gift of the Holy Spirit, out of love of corruptible things. By living in self-love and its cohort of passions, men honor the very cause of their existence's annihilation, and without knowing it, they themselves pursue the cause of their corruption. Men, like wild beasts, destroy their own nature. But nevertheless, I offer prayers and hope that you would encounter the living God now, who loves to the extent of offering his own blood rather than devouring yours, and who only asks for love in return. The living God who some say perhaps will continue asking for the length of eternity, like a beggar in his humility, only for your love. So I guess, does anybody have any questions or comments or refutations?
I think that's a whole lot to unpack right there. Just, am I right?
It's kind of a piece of poetry.
Yes, it's beautiful. We thank you for that. It seems like we've got several issues on the table here, and they all interrelate. Obviously, there's the issue of gender identity, which is much more so in the news lately, though it's not necessarily something we all encounter very often. And the issue of suicide, which is a very important issue to discuss, and also has been quite prevalent in the news lately. There was a young lady who had terminal cancer, and she was also praised by the media.
Yeah, right, and was praised for taking her life. Yeah.
So I'm wondering how an Orthodox Christian approaches this, or what's nuanced about the Orthodox understanding of gender identity, and of suicide, because it seems like the way you're talking about it, especially in this poem, you're neither praising the boy as bold and brave, or affirming himself over his gender issues and his family, nor are you condemning him as a shameful sinner. Could you kind of expand more on that and relate how an Orthodox Christian might be offer a different perspective on this issue?
I think maybe the way that we would differ, I guess from a lot of what you would encounter, maybe from different from Protestant conservative. So maybe the way that his parents responded to him, which I don't know the whole story behind that. I think one of the things that becomes really clear is that for Orthodoxy, sin is always understood as something like an illness, and so we respond to it that way. Like Saint Nikolai Velimirovich has a good prayer and poem where he talks about that we don't you don't go to a hospital and get angry with people because they have cancer. You sit beside them and you love them, and you're willing even to enter into their pain over what they're experiencing. And so I think that's the main difference, is that we speak so often about God being the only one who loves mankind. And so that even if there's consequences to our actions, which there are, if I go out and start shooting up heroin, I'm going to encounter serious problems in my life. And but that we see how even those consequences, God always desires the life and the wholeness and the healing of a person. And so even those consequences, they're meant, if we experience them as a deterrent, as something that would keep us from continuing down that road. And but unfortunately, what ends up happening is that we can even get to a point where we start to actually love the pain itself. And if we don't turn around, and so even there's still hope, and but at the same time, it's a very frightening place to be. But I think that, and I think, so there's another element to this that I think is Orthodox too. We also recognize that these desires exist within all of us, and that the closer that we approach to God, we start to realize that even if maybe we've never acted on these things, or we've never followed the train of thought, to an action, that the seeds of all of these things are within us. And so we start to realize that, like, again, there's a poem by one of the saints where he says, "I am in Adam and Adam is in me." So that the reality of brokenness and of fallenness is within each of us, and so, like, we don't condemn, when we encounter it in other people, because it's the same thing that's within me. So how could I stand there and, like, condemn somebody else because they happen to have fallen in this way rather than in that way? And especially when I know that I could be just as easily inclined to fall in the same manner, given the right circumstances and the opportunity. And does that sort of answer the question?
Absolutely. I'm wondering what in your mind and your opinion here causes the anguish for this boy, or caused I think some might say that it was his parents saying, no, no, you can't do that, or shaming
Right,
him.
and that was what I think really just bothered me about the response to the whole thing, because there was a lot of blame that was just laid on the parents. But even reading what he actually said, he said, "I want to do this, want to become a woman, and I can't. Therefore, my life isn't worth living." And so it was that, and that was what I was talking about in the poem when I said, that it was like a bird being played with by a cat and torn to pieces, and nobody scolded the cat. They scolded his parents. They scolded, other people, and there may have been blame there. I'm not saying that there wasn't. There may have been, it may have been fitting to lay some blame on his parents, but nobody scolded the cat. It was this desire itself, and the fact that he couldn't fulfill it, that drove him to kill himself. And that's what we talk about within Orthodoxy. We talk about sort of the passions. Like if we allow and passions are like desires that we suffer, and then actually they get to the point where if they're unfulfilled, they actually cause us pain. And
we allow our passions, our desires to become idols.
Right, and so they become an idol that demands everything, but then in the end gives nothing in return. Because frequently what ends up happening is that people follow this whole road of, just like I used the example earlier of anorexia or bulimia. So they follow this road trying to attain a certain image or a certain body or a certain this or a certain that. And then once they get there, it's not enough. The idol demands more. It always demands more.
So the idol is the passion, the desire.
Right, the desire that's come to take the place of God, in a way,
So this desire, it's in itself. You're saying it's not in itself a sin or something to be condemned as culpable. Like the boy wasn't culpable for his own desire, or how are we supposed to understand that, and how does that differ from another Christian maybe or another person?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of ultimately, so the goal of Orthodox spiritual life, like St. Paul says, it's for freedom that you have been set free. And so when we look at the saints of the church, we see people who are free. That doesn't mean that they don't desire anymore, but it means that they're not bound by anything, except, like St. Paul says, you should become slaves of Christ. And in that way, because Christ is the source of our life, the foundation of goodness, there's actually freedom in that.
Abundant life.
There's even more abundant life in that, right? So that our life actually becomes overflowing with goodness instead of stuck somewhere. But so it's a matter of these desires, I guess, being trained.
Thus giving them so much importance.
Right, and so
taking the place of God in our lives.
And so instead of allowing them to take the place of God, we center ourselves on Christ, and then these desires become transformed. They change. They find like their proper place, which takes a lot of, I think, a long time and a lot of effort. And we can, anyways.
If you put it really plainly too, another question similar to what I asked before, are our desires, are these passions something that God condemns us for? Are we judged for having passions, whether they be a desire to for too much food, or desire for sex, a desire for homosexual relations, or whatever it may be? Is it?
Yeah, so
Talk
no,
about
just the
that.
fact that we have them, so the fact that we feel moved, you know, um, there's no sin in that, because mostly it's the case that, like I said before, that given circumstances, birth, all these other different aspects that go into making up us, making up our life as a human being, um, they they're not something that we personally choose. They happen to us, you know. And it's our decision then, like, so we have this desire, or say like an inclination to a certain direction. And where freedom comes in is where we decide, well, what do we do with that? How do we respond to it? I have these desires. What am I going to do with them? And now it's definitely not a good idea to just assume that we can make the desire disappear or like cut it off, in many cases. And but it's a matter of, I feel like it has to be like we give it a different form or a different expression, you know. So if you can think of, like, if you're playing the piano, and there's certain things that go into that, and but the way that you play it, whether it's major, minor, the type of thing you play, that's all your decision, you know. And even though the piano has its nature, you know what I mean, and it has a certain number of strings, it has everything, and it's all kind of set in advance. And our life is a lot like that. But it's about, so Orthodoxy is about the way that we play, and the way that we direct the thing overall. Where are we going? And that's, we tend to focus a lot, especially within Orthodoxy, on the end of things. Like, what is the end goal, And unfortunately, like for this boy and for many of us, like if we get caught up in thinking that, well, it's the end goal is to become a woman, it's not an end. It ends up being another frustrating moment, where
And
I
why
feel like
is
we
it?
have to go and find something else now, So.
So, but why is it not an end in itself? Just kind of like, why is that desire not good or beneficial? Oh, sorry, Father, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm thinking.
Oh, good. Everybody's like, the microphone must be off.
No, I heard the question. I'll ask you what you think, because I'm not sure how to answer the question.
Maybe that's a question for a whole other day. But we do have a line of questions behind me. So
I wish I was prepared to answer the question. Maybe
okay.
Father Allen could say something.
Let's come back. Let's come back to it, because I've got a line of questions based on what we've already talked about, and so that one may be good for later on in the discussion.
Say really quick to that question that God tells us the way to life, and that doesn't happen to be within the things that He describes for us that lead to life. And so often we come up against these desires that we have that are counterfeit to life, and we see them as ends in themselves to giving us life. And what always ends up happening is there's always one more thing beyond that. It doesn't end up satisfying the way we thought it would. It ends up, in fact, most of the time, all of these kinds of desires end up robbing us of life. We end up not getting out of it what it promised to us to begin with.
Oh, so building off of that, there's this idea in St. Gregory of Nyssa where he talks about eternal progress. So Father Allen just said, and I said it too, that we constantly, you come to the one door and then you open another one. And but for the Church Fathers, so they recognize that there is something about that that's a reality about our relationship with God. Because how do you come to the end of the infinite God? How do you come to a point where you say, like, well, I know everything now, I'm done, you know? Because then God isn't God, you know? And and definitely within our relationship with God, there is this kind of never-ending progress. And but it's a progress into life, into goodness, and also, whenever they talk about it, so Gregory of Nyssa and St. Maximus, there's eternal progress, but there's also eternal stability. So there's like eternal rootedness. And so St. Gregory talks about, he asks the question, he says, how is it that our ceaseless movement is a sort of standing still, you know? And so I think what ends up happening when we follow our passions as if they were God is we feel that movement of progress, and we like that, like Miley Cyrus, it's the climb, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and so we feel that, you know, it's all just about the movement. And that's actually a really American thing, you know, this kind of ceaseless progress and like moving forward. You know, we're always after the frontier, even though you guys have made it to California and you're not, there's no further to go, but, you know, everybody still wants the frontier.
Go to the beach.
Right, right. You got to the beach and now you're just going to have to swim out into the water. There was a good book that I read once. It was by an early feminist author, and that was the end of the book. This poor woman, she swims out into the ocean and drowns. She just keeps swimming until she's done, you know. And it's a good metaphor, you know, that kind of just that drive just to get out there, you know. And but within Orthodoxy, so there's that movement forward, but there's also this abiding stability and firmness, and those are the type of things I think that really come from knowing the will of God, you know, and from having been given like a certain end in mind. So we talk about in the scriptures to attain to the fullness of Christ, and so that's like the end goal, you know, and
our sexual orientation, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual or transgender, whatever, none of that really falls into what God is calling us to as far as His will. None of it becomes what He describes for us as what our identity should be.
So sorry, now you had other questions, though.
That's great. Yeah. So we've primed the pump for questions. We've got a few people here eager to ask them. So let me put another person on.
You tell me off the microphone.
Okay. Hi, Father. Thanks for the talk. Hi, Father Alan. So we were having a discussion here earlier about this particular topic, and someone mentioned, you know, where does it say in the Bible that you can't have a sex change? And
right.
Yeah, and so
it's a good question.
There isn't a place in the Bible that describes that, and that's you know, that's, I guess, the question that I'm constantly confounded by is what's going on in the world today. It seems like it just continues to happen more and more, that there's these really unique cases of, you know, either people wanting to have a sex change, or like little, you know, even like from 4 or 5 year olds that like feel like their identity is not what their body tells them it is. And so is there, I don't really, I guess I don't have a question, but I'm just maybe because of the thing that you just brought up, that really Christianity and the Bible doesn't really address like sexual orientation as the identity of a person, but it seems in our world today that that's the central cause of what makes a person. And so how do we as Orthodox Christians like validate that, but that at the same time like not give it not get sidestepped by that argument?
Well, I think regarding sexual orientation, because obviously they're kind of pretty different things. As far as like somebody desiring to be a different gender or feeling sort of like not at home in their own body, and somebody desiring a member of the same sex, like they're kind of different things. But I remember, I mean, I've always liked, and I've heard it said a lot, like that, you know, somebody approached, I think, Father Thomas Hopko once. So he's a homosexual man. He came to the church and he said, I want to become, I'm interested in Orthodoxy. And Father Tom said, okay, you know, why are you interested in Orthodoxy? What do you know about the church? You know, who is Jesus Christ? You know, like, what do you know? You know, why are you interested? And the guy said, well, but I'm a homosexual. And Father Tom said, okay, we'll talk about that at some point, but why are you interested in Orthodoxy? And I think that, especially as Orthodox, like, we have to be willing to do that when we encounter people and the way that we relate with them. We can't be, it's not even reasonable to approach someone and expect it, because that is a huge part of someone's life. And ultimately, like, if someone were to be an Orthodox Christian, in most cases, you would find that the church would ask them if they have this orientation and they feel that it's something they can't change. For some people, it seems to be more fluid. For others, it seems to be something that's relatively fixed, or seems to be entirely fixed. And so the church ultimately would ask them to be celibate. Now, what ends up happening most of the time is that people just say, well, so that guy comes to their church, and they say, we're just going to have to be celibate. You know, they don't talk to him about Christ. They don't talk to him about the life in Christ. They don't talk to him about salvation. They don't talk to him about knowing God. They don't talk to him about the abiding peace of being rooted in Christ. They don't talk to him about the sacraments. They don't talk to him about anything that really matters. They just tell him right off the bat, you're going to have to be celibate. And so it's like, if you were trying to help someone go anywhere, you know, so let's say you wanted them to come visit you in California, and they said, well, I don't want to go. And you said, well, California is a horrible place. Like, who would do that? Who would tell them, you know, California is the worst place, it's going to be miserable for you, and you're going to hate it. But I really want you to come, you know. And so it's a matter of, we have to be upfront about things that are good, true, and beautiful, and always share those with other people. And Christ takes care of the rest. The Holy Spirit works with people. We think that we have to lay it all out on the line and, like, you know, have all of our ducks in a row right away, when really the whole process of salvation is far more mysterious than that. It happens for all of us. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at how people find their way into the church. It's a mystery, and we have to be willing as Christians to accept that. You know, especially, really, ultimately, it's a matter of faith. You know, that's what we believe. That the Holy Spirit is at work in creation, drawing all men, women, children into the embrace of the kingdom of God. And in spite of what appearances might tell us. And sorry.
I was just going to say, when the question that was asked, you talked about how the world looks at people and identifies them by their orientation.
So, right. And so it's a challenging thing where I've often thought about this problem, and it's a head scratcher. Because the behavior of, like, same-sex relations, I mean, that's been going on forever. You know, it's nothing new. as far as these types of relationships. They're not something that just like happened, recently.
Yeah.
And there have been societies where they were kind of looked on favorably, or maybe more favorably, maybe less. So there's been a lot of different cultural kind of things like that. What comes in today that's different is that really the attempts within modern psychology to analyze the soul and the human person, and to sort of break people down into their component parts. So that word, analysis, I often thought about that. So the Greek roots of it, it actually means to sort of destroy something, and which meaning to take it apart. And so you can think of how, right, to dissect. So like a body that's a corpse in the ground, it disintegrates, and so we try to do the same thing with modern science in the way that we analyze things. And so we take them apart into their little pieces. And we assume that it's all those pieces that make up the whole, And but the trouble is you can only analyze things that are dead. Like, you can't analyze living things and just take them apart because they'll die. And so there's a problem within psychology, science, I feel. It's my opinion, so you can take it for what it's worth. You can walk away and be like, that guy's nuts. It's my opinion that there's a problem in the whole approach to the human person, because it's one of analysis, so breaking apart, psychoanalysis, or breaking apart the soul, like looking at the person as if, there's all these different components. And then, in our particular case, like as it stands today, taking one of those elements, human sexuality, or actually, well, not even human sexuality, because, obviously, but orientation, and making it like primary, and as the defining characteristic of a person. And it seems to me to be foolish. But at the same time, like what the question brought up, is because that's a new thing, that whole idea of like kind of like breaking things apart and studying things like that, and the way that we look, the way that we view people, it's not addressed in the scriptures. It doesn't get brought up, and so it creates this thing, and we live in a culture where it's predominantly Protestant. And everybody wants, well, if you're going to show me the chapter and verse, and they use the Bible like it's some kind of magic book that's just going to solve every single problem that we ever encounter. And right, so there becomes an idolatry of the scriptures almost. But within Orthodoxy, it's like, I guess we have to be more. Well, for one, our response has to be richer than that. It has to be more holistic. It has to involve, like Father Allen's kind of mentioned, these different elements of the church's life. So the sacramental life, marriage, the participation, and all these other things.
Great. We've got another question here, so I'll put our next question on here.
Real quick, I had a question on the every suicide is like a suicide bomber. That quote that you made, so if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. I think mainly I was thinking about the reality. There was a time in my life, it was quite a while ago, when I was pretty suicidal. I was pretty young. And what I realized after I kind of came out of that depression, and when I wasn't depressed anymore, was how many people surrounded me the whole time that loved me and that cared for me, and that were telling me that and showing me through the things that they did, how they cared for me, and I didn't care. And it's often the case. It's been the case in some cases, like where psychologists are treating people that suffer from depression and say they've been suicidal and they've maybe made a plan, they want to kill themselves, and they'll ask them. The psychologist will ask the person, "Who would find you if you kill yourself? Who's going to find your body?" And it might be a father, and he'll say, "Oh my God, it would be my son. He'd come home from school and find my dead body in my bedroom." And so that's what I was thinking about when I wrote that every suicide is a suicide bomber, because there is this sense of like, you're not just destroying yourself, you're destroying so many people with that one action. And it almost is, in some ways, it can be almost an act that's something that people feel, well, they feel terrorized and haunted for the rest of their life. And they feel responsible, and guilty, because, and so there's all these things that are, so that's what I was thinking about when I said that. Does that make sense?
It made sense to me. Let me ask the crowd. Does that make sense, guys? Because I think a lot of people kind of look at suicide as between a person and themselves. Like, I killed myself. So what you're saying is that there's much larger consequences besides the person.
And when you meet people that have lost family members or friends to suicide, it's horrible. It's like I said, it damages them for the rest of their life.
Could you reflect more and expand on this tendency we're seeing of people praising suicide as brave? How do you feel about that?
I wonder about that, like where that comes from. And maybe I wish there was a way for more people to respond so I could hear them, like to hear what they think. Because I wonder about that, like where that's coming from. I think it has something to do with, I remember reading once a quote from, I think it was Elder Porphyrios, and he said, in the past, people were really proud, and you had to humble them, You had to do things to, keep them down, make sure that they weren't so arrogant and proud. You can kind of think of the early modern era with nationalism and people being really, even when I was growing up in the United States, I remember, do you ever see the movies for Rocky?
Yeah.
And how there's America, yeah, and now a lot of that has sort of disappeared. You look at Western Europe, and there's a lot of depression. There's really very little confidence, and you see the same type of things in the United States. It's Elder Porphyrios, he was talking, I think it was Elder Porphyrios. He said, people in the past, they were proud. You had to humble them. But he said, now people are so close to the brink of despair that you have to be very careful that you don't push them over it. Wow. And I think that has something to do with this. There's this sense of hopelessness and of nihilism, of thinking that ultimately life is meaningless. And so when somebody finally takes this step and just commits suicide, I feel like there's a sense, and again, this is my opinion.
That's all we ask for.
Right. That people feel like that when somebody does that, they're just acknowledging the reality of things.
Explain stuff for a minute, Father Jeff, and explain what the word that you just
used. Nihilism?
Nihilism.
Is everybody familiar with that word, nihilism?
Nihilism. Yeah.
It's sort of like, it means nothingism. It's that there's nothing. You know, nothing matters.
So,
There's no
so suicide.
substance to things. You know, no
So a
meaning.
suicidal person is an honest person, an honest
Yeah,
man.
I think maybe in our culture that we're kind of looking at that and saying, yeah, like, you know, they acknowledged it. And in the case of this kid that killed himself, a lot of people responded with, well, like he did it, they felt like he did it for a good cause or something. You know, like, so since life is ultimately meaningless anyways, you know, if you kill yourself for the sake of, you know, so that others, to proving a point, you know, somehow it lends like some kind of meaning to it. And actually, on a related note, I had a friend when I was living in Boston. I used to work as a painter painting houses, and she was kind of grew up. So I think her mother was Jewish, father was Irish Catholic, and I think he actually like locked him and the baby in the bathroom once and baptized her in the sink.
Oh, wow.
When he was arguing with his wife about it. But so she didn't really know anything about Christianity. I mean, he had done that, but they never went to church. And I was talking once about the martyrs, you know, of our church. And in her mind, martyrs are people that fly planes into buildings. Martyrs are people that strap bombs to themselves and blow themselves up in a marketplace. And so it's this. So it's like martyrdom has become. Well, and also it's like we take up the cross in order to use it as a political weapon, you know, to force other people to bend to our will. And that's not what the cross is. The cross is the ultimate example of self-emptying love. And the martyrs of the church are those who lose their life for the faith. They don't, you know, from the beginning, the church has discouraged really strongly people from running out trying to seek martyrdom or trying to get people to kill them, you know, because that did happen, believe it or not. Like, in the past, we had these people that wanted to get killed. And I forgot where I was going with that, but it's going to come back to me in a second, maybe.
This kind of like terrorist, suicidal desire.
But so that's what you see a lot in the American political landscape. Everybody wants to be a martyr because it gives you the upper hand. You know, I was talking with a friend about it once, how when two dogs are fighting with each other and they're really, you know, in it to the death, you know, they're really fighting, one of them sometimes will show its neck a little bit. You know, we'll just give its neck to the other dog so the other dog can bite, and the other dog will stop just for that split second, and it gives, you know, it gives the one that showed its neck the upper hand, and it's able to kill the other dog. It's able to continue fighting. And I think frequently, in our culture, what you see a lot today is people make themselves into martyrs. But it's like a suicide bomber. It's not an authentic, in the Christian understanding of things of martyrdom. And this woman that I worked with, like, that was all she knew of martyrdom. It didn't mean, it just meant, like, killing yourself in order to manipulate people.
Wow.
You know? And I think that's more and more, and I think that's unfortunately even the way that some churches have come to present themselves and have come to present the cross. They start presenting Christianity in that way, you know, in order to like just gain more political influence or more powers. You know, it's really sad, and I think it's ultimately it's a corruption of the faith too.
Very interesting. We've got one more question written here, and it's, how do you explain to others the Orthodox view of homosexuality, or I guess in our case too here, gender identity, gender confusion, as an illness? So how do you present the idea of the illness as opposed to
right, just like another, I guess you'd say, like another variety. You know, I guess that would be the contemporary thing. It's like just that this is just another what's the term? Alternative lifestyle. It's just another way of
Yeah.
being.
Or on the other side of the issue, as a complete as an abomination that we should just
Right.
everybody who has that, anybody who struggles with that is condemned because of their struggle. Like
Right. I
you,
wish I had a more developed answer. I think the answer comes from, or where the answer is to be found, is by looking at the original intent of our sexuality, and I'm just thinking, trying to think clearly about it, as far as like humanity being male and female. Why is that? You know, a sort of a reflection that, in a certain sense, in the image of God being differenced, you know, so you have differences, but there's a unity there. And we teach as Orthodox that with the fall, there comes about a fracture in that reality, in that, even in that ability for there to be a genuine union. And we see that, you know, throughout the world, throughout all time. There's constant antagonism between male and female. And I feel like in some cases that antagonism becomes so deeply rooted, and perhaps even biological, that it ends up getting reflected in even in same-sex relationships. And there have been cultures, you know, like the Spartans in the past, where they just accepted that, and they would only get together with the women just to breed, and then the rest of the time they spent their time separate. And which is kind of like a, you know, that's where things have gone totally in a really, you know, like the fracture has become, you know, as wide as the Grand Canyon, you know. But so I think the Church teaches us through the sacrament of marriage that what we're about is trying to heal that brokenness between male and female within the sacrament of marriage. And or in the case of monasticism, to kind of supersede it in a different way, you know. And by sort of well, anyways, that's a different topic. But so within marriage, that there's an attempt to kind of like find that union again, and the grace of God is there to help in that. And so I think if we look at that, we can kind of see how these other things, like just like in a kind of the really simple understanding of when we talk about sin, that sin is, it's missing the mark. And so that these same-sex pairings, they miss the mark. You know, they're shooting. It's like when we're shooting at a target and we miss. And so that ultimately they do. And in expressing that kind of erotic attraction, which is meant to bring male and female back together again, instead it ends up being misdirected and frustrated from its purpose. And I should say too, you know, we use the analogy of illness with sin, and we have to be careful with our analogies. So, for instance, cancer is an illness, right?
yes.
And you respond to it frequently by trying to cut it out, by applying intense radiation, by doing all this stuff, and in some cases, like the radiation actually, you know, it causes a lot of damage to the body, and so you do all these things to eradicate the cancer. In the case of our sinful inclinations and these illnesses, and especially in the case of human sexuality, because it's such an intimate part. It is an intimate part of who people are. Trying to approach it in that way, of like, well, we'll just blast it or cut it out. You know what I mean? Or burn it out. Do something like that. You have to be really careful because you could end up really hurting a person. And so even though, you know, I used that example of illness before, that doesn't mean that, like, you know, somehow, okay, it's an illness, so we respond to it just like modern medicine responds to any sort of illness. You know, we have to be, like Christ says, you know, wise as serpents but simple as doves. And we have to be really discerning in the way that we approach people and in how we deal with these things. And I'll tell you one example, which was fascinating to me, and I really liked it, about Elder Paisios. So I don't know if you know recently, so he's this Greek monk. He was recently canonized as a saint. And so there was a man that was struggling with homosexuality that went to visit him, and he didn't know what to do, and he was starting to fall into despair with his life. And he went to see Elder Paisios because he thought maybe he could help him. And he walks in, and Elder Paisios got up, walked over to him, and slapped him really hard in the face. So much that he kind of like fell down. And then after about 30 seconds, Elder Paisios walked over, knelt down, and hugged him. And he said, "I didn't slap you for what you're doing," meaning his homosexuality. "I slapped you for what you're thinking of doing," because the guy was thinking about killing himself. And that was what that guy needed, you know, because eventually, you know, through that event, and then also, you know, they had many talks after that, and he was able to pull his life together, you know. And so we, as Christians, and I'm certainly not encouraging you to go slap people. Don't ever do that. but we have to be really discerning and careful about the way that we approach people, and there's different things that are required, you know, in every situation, depending on where the person's coming from and where they're at. Like that guy needed to be shaken because he was falling into despair. And so anyways, okay.
Well, this has been a really great discussion, and it's been an hour, so I was going to ask if you have any final thoughts that you want to share with us before we call it a night.
I'm going blank.
It's okay. You went strong for about an hour and 5. So this has been a huge pleasure. Let's give a big round of applause for.
Wait, I'm trying to get my hand on the screen.
There it is.
So thank you too for listening to me. I appreciate it. I know that all of these things are really challenging. So those are my final thoughts.
All right. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you so much. And
my final thought is, I love you all. I'll see you next week.
Hey.
All right.
Bye.